Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret of Mana Redux. I'm your host, Mana Redux himself, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the evolution of the Gaia Lowlands. In case you didn't know, the Gaia Lowlands was a name given to the first area of Secret of Mana, the one before the Upper Land, and it was only called that in the Japanese release. As for us American players, well, we just know it as a place where you whack a lot of mutant rabbit things and hope for the best. It's got the Waterfall, Poto's Village, Pandora, Gaia's Naval, Kippo Village, the Haunted Forest, the Witch's Castle, and the Water Palace. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention Nico's house. What a slime ball. You probably walked through this area hundreds of times and had no idea how much had to happen to get it this far, but that's what we're going to be talking about today. If I had to guess, I'd say there's probably at least 10 times the number of pre-release screenshots of the Gaia Lowlands than of any other area in Secret of Mana. It's fairly clear that the development team poured a host of effort into this one place, and it shows. In terms of gameplay, no other area really compares. There's multiple paths through the wilderness, and navigating it is more of a challenge, often requiring the use of the well-designed cannon travel network. Resources are limited, battle areas are more intricately designed, and the enemies, which play off each other like nowhere else, require more strategy to defeat, especially since you don't have magic to rely on for most of this part of the game. This part of Secret of Mana is like a microcosm of what the entire game could have been with more time and memory space for added depth. It's a shame because what we see here really stands out. First, there's a detail about Secret of Mana that's easy to miss, but makes a huge difference with the overall vibe. That is, the overworld map of the Gaia Lowlands is surprisingly close to the layout of areas you explore on the ground. If you take a look at Poto's Village, for example, you'll see how well the overhead view matches the actual ground environment, which we call the active view. This kind of attention to detail is something the development team really nailed, and if you look at the whole world, you'll notice that the Gaia Lowlands is the only place with this level of consistency. Based on early world maps, it looks like other areas were supposed to have been realized the same way. On a 2 MB Super Nintendo cartridge in 1993, this was an extremely ambitious design choice that was not matched in any of Square's contemporary RPGs. Now let's take a look at just some of the pre-release materials that give us an idea of how the Gaia Lowlands evolved during development. Over the final year of production, there were 3 known versions of the area, with the last one being the one we got on the SNES. Every time the active view changed, the overhead map changed with it, giving us an invaluable view of how the design progressed. Let's go through each area now and see how it all came together, starting with the exposition. First up is the Waterfall. During development, it looked a little different, just not as polished as what we got in the final. On a programming note, if you take a look at this modified screen from the SNES, you'll see that your player character is hidden in the middle, while the Randy on the right is just there for the cutscene. Once you fall off the log, you land in one of the most immersive screens in the entire game. The scope and detail of this area and how it perfectly flows into the next screen are extremely memorable. We have some earlier rough shots of this area. The design here is clearly in an early stage. And there is a completely blank ghost figure here, which might have been unfinished to avoid spoilers. There's also development screens of Poto being tested out, and some early shots that show all 3 characters in the stream, though something like this never actually happens in Secret of Mana. The water and bridge mechanics as they are in the final are unfinished, and something like this would not be possible from a gameplay perspective. Now let's talk about the early concepts for Poto's Village. Here you can see Flammy flying over an early version of the overhead view of the village. If you compare the active view to the final version, it's clear that the design went through quite a few changes. We have a ton of screenshots from this early Poto's design. Some are quite notable, like one where a guy says the same thing as the kid near the pub in the final. Also, this is probably an early version of the spot where Randy falls to fight the mantis ant. Then there's this shot of Nico at the item shop. Maybe he was really here at this point, or it could just be a test. The dialogue in town was still being worked on with lines like, "My mom told me I shouldn't talk to people I don't know, so I won't tell you anything." And, "Me? Today's my birthday, you know. Give me something." One of the best bits comes from this shot of the dwarf elder from Gaia's naval who's depicted in Poto's here. His dialogue mentions that the underground palace was buried in an earthquake long ago, but we're interested in his name, Elder Aule. This is a reference to Lord of the Rings. There's a character named Aule who's a smith and creator of the dwarves. In the final game, the dwarf elder doesn't have a name at all besides just Elder. Go figure. We also have pre-release footage of all three characters fighting the mantis ant in his cave, probably just another test. And Kilroy was also tried out here, along with Death Machine, who was eventually cut from the American release in favor of Kettlekin. We even have an early version of Gemma waiting outside the pub before the mantis ant fight. The area between Potos and Pandora looked completely different during development. Like a lot of pre-release areas, this one isn't as refined as the final version, and was likely just a placeholder until the final design could be finished. But these snazzy-looking trees never made it to the SNES, even though they're everywhere in the beta shots. Then there's the Goblin Village, which actually had a fully playable version during development. If you watched our video on the evolution of the world map, you might remember that there was supposed to be a cannibal island in the game, and it seems like this Goblin Village was going to be that area before it was repurposed. In the final, the village is just a cutscene, and there's barely any detail because you can't explore it. It actually appears on the world map, but landing here takes you someplace very different. There's also the area outside of Nico's shop, which changed a lot. We have video footage of this area too. On the Overworld map there was an area planned, then deleted on the next map, and then the simple depiction was created for the final game, which does not match the active view. Our best guess is that the path here was once supposed to lead to a longer route between Nico's and the Water Palace. Check out our video on the deleted path if you want to learn more about that. Speaking of the Water Palace, we have some early shots of it with unfinished graphics and early character designs. This shot even shows Gemma in what seems like a lost area of the palace. Very mysterious. Moving on to Pandora, we see that there were two early concepts for the town before it became the final version. The earlier concept was seen in our first video and shows what we think is the same mysterious object that's in Northtown on the world map. The second concept is also way different than the final. In the active view for Pandora, compare the pre-release shot of Prim at the castle to the one on the right. Then, these mesmerizing images here show what was supposed to be Prim's house. Darn. In the final game, she lives in just another building in the middle of town. Despite the intricate detail, all of the graphics for Prim's intended home are not found in the SNES ROM. This shot here shows the armor shop, which is the same as the final, but the developers decided the area didn't need to be so big in the end, which is kind of sad because it looks really good here. One of the most famous glitches in Secret of Mana happens if you get to Prim's house before you've had the chance to name her. If you talk to her dad, he tries to say her name, but since she doesn't have one yet, he just speaks the equivalent of 12 blank spaces. I'll mention that if you break sequence somehow, and someone says Prim or Popoe's name before you give them one, the same phenomenon will happen. If you try to talk to Prim upstairs, she just vanishes. It's possible that this was a hastily constructed scene to accommodate every possible way to get through the opener. Or as we speculated before, it might be a leftover remnant of what was once a solo intro for Prim. It's possible the Secret of Mana was originally going to be more like Trials of Mana, where you pick one character to start with and meet up with the others later. We've seen a lot of solo shots of Prim and Popoe in pre-release materials, so this could have been something that was tried during development. There's footage of Flammy flying over a beta ruins, along with a ton of shots of early fights and areas. Given the diversity of enemies, a lot of these were probably just tests. This area has a door in the final, and this one doesn't exist at all. One interesting shot that showed up in a lot of promotional materials shows the stage room with the same crest that's outside the ruins. There was even a second level at this point. The vampire enemy was tried out here. It was later moved to the Northtown ruins. The area between Pandora and Kippo, and then on to Gaia's naval, changed a lot too. Our good friend Bahamut created this composite image to show how it looked. Clearly this was intended to be replaced by the more detailed area we ended up with. You can still spot traces of the beta version on the Super Nintendo world map, which was not finished to match what ended up being here in the final. You'll notice that Kippo was due west of Pandora during development, both in the air and on the ground, but in the final game, it's way up north in the active view. If you land where Kippo is on the world map, it's still where it was during development, and it magically moves you far to the north to match the final version. Next, we get to Gaia's naval. The exterior map for this area is one of the most immersive in the whole game, just like the opening Waterfall. Bahamut put together a composite of all the different screenshots to show how this area looked as well. I'm telling you, Bahamut is a Jedi. As everything can't be lined up perfectly, these shots are probably from different eras of development. The programmer known as Tom imagined how this may have actually looked during gameplay. Okay, fine, Tom's a Jedi too. Like previous areas we've seen, this is not nearly as sophisticated as the final, and was probably another placeholder. Speaking of the final, there was another entrance to Gaia's naval that was removed close to the release date. One of my favorite pre-release shots is of Randy climbing an underground hill to reach what was probably an important chest overlooking a pool of lava. I'm almost certain that this is Gaia's naval. It's such a great moment, and we even had video footage of it from a Japanese store promo, but naturally, we were deprived of it on the Super Nintendo. Tropicalo was tested out in 2 different areas outside the dwarf village. There's a lot of early stills and footage of these areas, showing the development process in action. The SNES fight is far more compelling with the earthen barriers. And finally, we get a look at the Haunted Forest. Nico's shown in a spot that doesn't exist in the final release, and we even have early concepts of the Witch's Castle from the world map. It's possible there was originally going to be a western exit from Gaia's naval that led to the Haunted Forest if overhead maps are any indication. The top level of the cave's exterior can't be seen normally, but there what appears to be a dummied out western exit that may have led to more areas at one point. There's a mountain of unknown areas from the Gaia Lowlands, a few of which we covered on our video on the evolution of the world map, and a few you can see here. So why did the team spend so much time here, only for most of it to be remixed or cut before release? There's no clear answer, but it's likely more than one factor. For one, it might have been easier to test different map variations given that the Gaia Lowlands maps mostly used the same assets. There was probably also a time crunch, as the release date was pushed back a few times, and there wasn't enough content later in the game to balance out such a complex first area. Finally, we've mentioned elsewhere that Secret of Mana only has a handful of unused doors. Doors are program objects that allow players to be transported from one map to another after an interaction with it. For example, if I want to move from this exterior map to Pandora, I have to step on the area that's been defined as a door, and the game switches to the appropriate location on the Pandora map. In older games, there were a limited number of these. In Secret of Mana, there's 1,024 to be exact. Given that only a few are unused, this means that the developers would not have had enough room for the larger Gaia Lowlands as depicted in these screenshots, and certainly wouldn't be able to add a lot of content elsewhere beyond what's already in the game. It's a testament to how they were fighting the limitations of the SNES cartridge at all times. That's a wrap on our journey through the evolution of Secret of Mana's areas. We're just getting started though. Be sure to follow our channel for more videos and check out our website at manaredux.com. Thanks for watching. Until next time.